I woke up to the sound of construction on my property at 6 in the morning, and that's when I knew the Pinewood Heights HOA had finally lost their minds. My name is Xavier Vance, and I own a 5-acre plot on the edge of Boulder, Colorado, where the mountains meet the suburbs. I bought this land 3 years ago specifically because it sat just outside the HOA boundaries, or so I thought. The house itself was modest, but the land was mine, completely mine, and I planned to keep it that way. I'd seen enough horror stories about homeowner associations to know I wanted nothing to do with them. The storm that hit us in February 2025 was brutal. Weather forecasters had been warning about it for days, calling it the worst blizzard to hit Colorado in decades. When it finally arrived, it brought 3 feet of snow, wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour, and temperatures that dropped to 15 below zero. Power lines went down across the county. Thousands of homes lost electricity, including most of the Pinewood Heights development that bordered my property. I was prepared. I had a generator, plenty of fuel, a wood-burning stove, and enough supplies to last weeks if necessary. I hunkered down and waited it out like any sensible person would. What I didn't know was that while I was inside staying warm, the Pinewood Heights HOA board, led by their president Patricia Morrison, had decided my land was the perfect spot for an emergency warming shelter. When the construction sounds pulled me from sleep that Monday morning, the storm had passed, but left everything buried in snow. I threw on my boots and coat and trudged outside to find a crew of about 15 people erecting a large prefabricated structure on the eastern corner of my property, right near the road. They'd already cleared the snow and laid down a foundation pad. The building itself was maybe 40 feet by 20 feet, with walls already going up. "Hey," I shouted, making my way through the knee-deep snow. "What the hell is going on here?" A woman in a purple parka turned around, her face red from the cold. She was probably in her mid-40s, with blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail and the kind of expression that said she was used to getting her way. "Oh, you must be the property owner. I'm Patricia Morrison, president of the Pinewood Heights HOA board. We're establishing an emergency warming shelter. With the power outages affecting over 200 homes in our community, we need a centralized location where residents can stay warm and safe." "On my land," I said, incredulous. "Did it occur to you to ask permission?" Patricia's face hardened. "This is an emergency situation, Mr. Vance. We don't have time for lengthy negotiations. Under Colorado emergency management statutes, community organizations are permitted to utilize available resources during declared emergencies. The county declared a state of emergency yesterday." "That doesn't give you the right to build on my property," I said, pulling out my phone. "I'm calling the sheriff." "Good luck with that," Patricia said, turning back to supervise the construction. "Cell towers are still down and the sheriff's department is a bit busy with actual emergencies. We'll sort out the paperwork once the crisis has passed." I stood there fuming, watching as the crew continued working. She was right about the phones. I had no cell service and my landline had gone dead during the storm. My internet was down too. I was effectively cut off and Patricia knew it. Over the next 3 days, I watched helplessly as the HOA completed their warming shelter on my land. They brought in space heaters, cots, blankets, and supplies. By Wednesday evening, nearly 50 people from Pinewood Heights were camped out in the building, grateful for the warmth and shelter. Families with young children, elderly residents, people whose homes had become dangerously cold. I couldn't deny they needed help, but that didn't make it legal for the HOA to commandeer my property. When phone service finally returned on Thursday, I immediately called the Boulder County Sheriff's Department. A deputy named Williams came out that afternoon. "So let me get this straight," Deputy Williams said, standing next to his patrol car as we looked at the warming shelter. "The HOA built this during the emergency. Without my permission," I confirmed. "On my land. That's trespassing at minimum, maybe several other violations." The deputy scratched his head. "It's complicated, Mr. Vance. During a declared emergency, certain rules do get bent." They probably genuinely believed they had the authority to do this. "Believe doesn't make it legal," I said. "No, it doesn't," Williams agreed. "But here's the thing. Right now, you've got about 50 people in there who have nowhere else to go. Most of their homes still don't have power. If I tell them they have to leave, some of them could be in real danger. The county shelters are completely full." I felt the moral weight of his words, but I wasn't going to be pushed around. "I'm not saying throw them out today. I'm saying the HOA needs to face consequences for this, and they need to compensate me." Deputy Williams nodded. "That's fair. I'll document everything and file a report. You'll want to talk to a lawyer about your options. In the meantime, how about we give them until Monday to make other arrangements? That's 4 more days. By then, power should be restored to most homes." I agreed reluctantly. I wasn't a monster. But I made it clear to the deputy that I expected action to be taken against Patricia Morrison and the HOA board. That evening, Patricia showed up at my door. She'd traded her parka for a long wool coat, but her expression was just as stern as before. "Mr. Vance, I understand you called the sheriff," she said without preamble. "You built on my property without permission," I replied. "What did you expect?" "I expected a little community spirit," Patricia said sharply. "We have families with children, elderly residents with health conditions. The emergency required immediate action." "Then you should have come to me first," I said. "I might have helped, but you assumed you could just take what you wanted." Patricia's expression shifted slightly, a hint of calculation entering her eyes. "What would it take to resolve this situation amicably? Remove the structure from my property as soon as possible," I said. "And we'll talk about compensation for the use of my land." "The building cost us $18,000, Patricia said. "We can't just tear it down. It's a quality structure. We were planning to maintain it as a permanent community resource." "Not on my land, you're not," I said firmly. "What if we paid you?" Patricia asked. "For the use of the land, a lease arrangement." That caught me off guard. I hadn't expected her to offer payment so readily. "Keep talking." "The structure occupies approximately 1/8 of an acre," Patricia said, clearly having prepared these numbers. "The going rate for land lease in this area is approximately $800 per month. We would pay you $1,000 per month for a 10-year lease agreement." I did the quick math. $12,000 per year for land I wasn't using anyway. It wasn't a bad deal, but I didn't trust Patricia Morrison as far as I could throw her. "I'll need to think about it and talk to a lawyer," I said. "Of course," Patricia replied smoothly. "But I'll need an answer by Monday. If you're not willing to lease the land, we'll have to dismantle the shelter and relocate it, which will cost the HOA considerably more money. Money that comes from our residents' dues." She left, and I spent the rest of the evening researching property law and lease agreements. The more I looked into it, the more I realized Patricia had put me in a clever position. If I forced them to remove the building immediately, I'd look like the bad guy to the community. If I accepted the lease, I'd be legitimizing what they'd done without permission. Friday morning, I drove into Boulder to meet with a real estate attorney named Richard Caldwell. His office was in a modern building near the Pearl Street Mall, and he had 20 years of experience with property disputes. "They absolutely violated your property rights," Caldwell said after hearing my story. "Trespass, construction without permits, unauthorized use of land. You could sue them for damages and force them to remove the structure. But, I said, hearing the hesitation in his voice, but juries are unpredictable, especially when the other side can paint themselves as heroes who helped people during an emergency, Caldwell explained. And litigation would cost you tens of thousands in legal fees with no guarantee of recovering those costs. So I should just accept their lease offer, I asked. Not exactly, Caldwell said, leaning back in his chair. You should negotiate. They came in at $1,000 per month, which honestly is low for the situation. They're desperate. They built an $18,000 structure on land they don't own. If you refuse to lease, they have to either abandon it or move it, both of which are expensive and embarrassing. You have the leverage here. What do you suggest? I asked. Caldwell smiled. Let me draft a lease agreement. We'll ask for $2,000 per month, plus they cover all property taxes associated with the leased portion. They maintain comprehensive liability insurance naming you as additional insured, and they're responsible for all utilities and maintenance. Most importantly, we include a clause that says their initial unauthorized construction constitutes trespass, and the lease agreement doesn't waive your right to seek damages for that initial violation. Will they agree to that? I asked. If they want to keep their shelter, they will, Caldwell said. Let me handle the negotiations. Over the weekend, the shelter remained occupied as power slowly returned to Pinewood Heights. By Sunday evening, most residents had returned to their homes, but the building remained, a constant reminder of the HOA's presumption. Monday morning, Caldwell sent the proposed lease agreement to Patricia Morrison. Within 2 hours, she called my cell phone directly. $2,000 per month is outrageous, Patricia said without greeting. We offered you a fair rate. You built on my land without permission, I replied calmly. Mr. Caldwell's proposal is more than fair considering the circumstances. The HOA board will never approve this, Patricia said. We have a budget to maintain. Then remove the building, I said. I'm sure explaining to your residents why you wasted $18,000 will be a fun conversation. There was a long silence. I'll need to call an emergency board meeting. You do that, I said. But I want an answer by Wednesday, or I'm filing for an injunction to have the structure removed. Tuesday afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. His name was Marcus Chen, and he served on the Pinewood Heights HOA board as treasurer. Unlike Patricia, he seemed genuinely apologetic. Mr. Vance, I want to apologize for how this situation was handled, Marcus said as we sat in my living room. I was against building on your property without permission from the start, but Patricia pushed it through claiming emergency authority. Several board members went along with it because people were genuinely suffering. I understand the emergency was real, I said. But the HOA still violated my rights. Absolutely, Marcus agreed. And you'd be well within your rights to sue us. But here's the situation. The HOA has about $80,000 in reserves. If we end up in litigation, that money will be drained quickly. If we lose, we'll have to levy special assessments on all our residents to cover the costs. Families who are already struggling financially. So I should just accept the financial burden instead, I asked. No, Marcus said quickly. I'm not asking you to do that. I'm here to tell you the board met last night, and we voted 4-3 to accept your attorney's terms. Patricia voted against it along with 2 others, but the majority recognized we don't have a choice. That surprised me. Patricia's okay with being outvoted, Marcus hesitated. Patricia is difficult. She's used to getting her way and she sees compromise as weakness, but she'll follow the board's decision. We're prepared to sign the lease agreement. With all the terms, including acknowledging the initial trespass, I asked. Yes, Marcus confirmed. All of it. We'll pay $2,000 per month, cover the property taxes on that 1/8 acre, maintain insurance with you as additional insured, and handle all utilities and maintenance. The first payment will include back rent for the time the structure has already been on your property. We shook hands, and on Wednesday morning, I met with the HOA board at their community center in Pinewood Heights. It was a modern building with a large meeting room where the board held their monthly sessions. All 7 board members were present, along with Caldwell. Patricia sat at the head of the table, her expression sour. The other board members included Marcus Chen, a retired teacher named Dorothy Sanders, a young software engineer named James Peterson, a nurse named Rebecca Walsh, a contractor named Tom Hughes, and a retired police officer named Frank Martinez. Let's make this quick, Patricia said coldly. We're here to sign the lease agreement under protest. You can protest all you want, I said, sitting down across from her, but you built on my land without permission. We helped our community during a crisis, Patricia shot back, something you apparently couldn't be bothered to do. I wasn't given the chance, I replied. You never asked. Caldwell cleared his throat. Let's focus on the agreement. I've reviewed the final version with Mr. Vance, and everything appears to be in order. We spent the next hour going through the lease agreement page by page. It was a 10-year lease with the option to extend, requiring monthly payments of $2,000, covering property taxes for the leased portion, requiring minimum $5 million in liability insurance, and establishing maintenance requirements. There was also the clause acknowledging the unauthorized construction, though it specified I wouldn't seek additional damages as long as the lease terms were met. One by one, the board members signed. Patricia signed last, practically throwing the pen down when she finished. Congratulations, Mr. Vance, she said icily. You've managed to extract money from a community organization trying to help people. No, I corrected her. I've managed to get fair compensation for property you took without asking. There's a difference. The first check arrived the following week, for $6,000, covering the initial 3 weeks the shelter had been on my property plus the first month going forward. I deposited it and felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and unease. The money was rightfully mine, but Patricia's words had stung more than I wanted to admit. Over the next few months, the warming shelter saw sporadic use. The HOA opened it during cold snaps for homeless outreach, hosted community meetings there, and even rented it out for small private events. Each month, like clockwork, I received my $2,000 check. But Patricia Morrison wasn't done with me. In early June, I received a citation from Boulder County Code Enforcement. According to the notice, someone had filed a complaint that my property was in violation of multiple county ordinances. Tall grass exceeding 12 inches, junk vehicles visible from the road, and unpermitted structures. I knew immediately who was behind it. My grass was a bit tall, I'd give them that. It was nearly summer, and I preferred a more natural look than a manicured lawn. But junk vehicles. I had my 10-year-old truck that I drove daily and an old Ford Bronco I was restoring, both parked on my property behind a fence. And unpermitted structures. My storage shed was grandfathered in from before current regulations. I called the code enforcement officer, a patient woman named Angela Torres, and explained the situation. Mr. Vance, I have to investigate all complaints, she said. But between you and me, this looks like harassment. The photos submitted with the complaint are taken from extreme angles to make things look worse than they are. Can you tell me who filed the complaint? I asked. I'm not supposed to, but the complaint came from the Pinewood Heights HOA, Angela said. Specifically from their president, Patricia Morrison. Of course it did. Angela came out the next day and did a thorough inspection. She found the grass violation was legitimate, though minor. The vehicles were properly stored and not visible from the public road unless someone trespassed onto my property to take photos, which Patricia apparently had done. The shed was indeed grandfathered. I'm going to cite you for the grass, Angela said apologetically. Just mow it down to 10 inches and we're good. Everything else is fine. And Mr. Vance, I'm noting in my report that the complainant appears to have trespassed to obtain some of these photos. I mowed the grass that afternoon and sent photos to Angela, who closed the case. But I knew this was just the beginning. Patricia had declared war. 2 weeks later, I got a notice from the county health department. Someone had reported me for having a septic system that was allegedly contaminating groundwater. This required a full septic inspection, which cost me $700. The inspector found everything in perfect working order and was visibly annoyed at having his time wasted. Someone really has it out for you, the inspector said. This is the third bogus complaint I've investigated this month, all targeting people who have had disputes with HOAs. Then came the visit from Animal Control, investigating a report of dangerous dogs on my property. I don't own any dogs. Then the building inspector, checking on an alleged unpermitted addition to my house that didn't exist. Each complaint came from the Pinewood Heights HOA, and each one cost me time and stress, even though they were all eventually dismissed. I called Caldwell. This is harassment. Can we do something about it? Document everything, he advised. Every complaint, every inspection, every cost. We're building a case for harassment and abusive process. If she keeps this up, we can seek a restraining order and possibly damages. In August, things escalated. I came home from grocery shopping to find a Boulder County Sheriff's deputy waiting at my door. It was Deputy Williams again, the same one who'd responded to my initial call about the warming shelter. Mr. Vance, I need to ask you some questions, he said, his expression serious. About what? I asked, genuinely confused. We received a report that you threatened Patricia Morrison, Williams said. She claims you called her and said you were going to burn down the warming shelter with people inside. My stomach dropped. That's completely false. I never called her and I would never threaten anyone. Can you provide phone records? Williams asked. Absolutely, I said. You can check every call I've made for the past 6 months. You won't find a single one to Patricia Morrison. Williams nodded. I believe you honestly, Miss. Morrison has been making a lot of complaints lately about various people, and most of them haven't panned out. But I have to investigate every credible threat. Do you mind if I look around, make sure there's nothing dangerous? Go ahead, I said, opening my door. I have nothing to hide. Williams did a quick walk through my house and property, finding nothing concerning. Before he left, he gave me some advice. Mr. Vance, I'd suggest you consider filing for a restraining order against Miss Morrison. Between you and me, she's harassing you. This false report could be considered filing a false police report, which is a crime. If you want to press charges, you'd be within your rights. I thought about it carefully. Part of me wanted to hit back hard, but I also knew that escalating things further might just make the situation worse. Instead, I called an emergency meeting with the HOA board, excluding Patricia. Marcus Chen agreed to meet me at a coffee shop in Boulder, along with Frank Martinez, the retired police officer on the board. We know what she's been doing, Frank said immediately. She's obsessed with this situation. At every board meeting, she brings up ways to make your life difficult. The rest of the board has tried to rein her in, Marcus added. But she's the president, and she has support from 2 other members. We need 5 votes to remove her, and we only have 4 who are willing. What if I told you I have grounds to press criminal charges against her for filing a false police report? I asked. Frank's expression turned grave. Did she really do that? I explained the threatening phone call allegation. Frank shook his head in disgust. That's serious, he said. If the sheriff's department pursues it, she could face charges. But more importantly for the HOA, if our president is charged with a crime related to HOA business, it could expose the entire organization to liability. What if I offered a trade? I suggested. I won't press charges if the board removes her as president. Marcus and Frank exchanged glances. We'd need to call an emergency board meeting, Marcus said. And we'd need to be very careful about how we handle it. Patricia won't go quietly. 3 days later, the Pinewood Heights HOA held an emergency board meeting. I wasn't present, but Marcus called me afterward to explain what had happened. It was ugly, he said. When we told Patricia we were voting on her removal as president, she went ballistic. She threatened to sue every board member personally. She claimed we were discriminating against her, that this was all you're doing, that we were betraying the community. But you voted, I asked. 5-2, Marcus confirmed. She's removed as president. Dorothy Sanders is taking over as interim president until the next election. Patricia is still on the board, but without the president's authority, she can't do much damage. How did she take it? I asked. She stormed out threatening lawsuits, Marcus said. But between you and me, I think she knows she crossed a line. Frank told her privately that filing a false police report is a crime and that we had documentation of all her harassment. She got very quiet after that. I felt relieved but not satisfied. Patricia was still on the board, still living in Pinewood Heights, and still, presumably, angry at me. I didn't trust that this was over. I was right. In September, I received a certified letter from an attorney named Gregory Stone, representing Patricia Morrison personally, not the HOA. The letter alleged that I had defamed Patricia, interfered with her duties as HOA president, and caused her severe emotional distress. It demanded $50,000 in damages and a public apology. I forwarded it to Caldwell, who called me that evening laughing. This is the most frivolous demand letter I've seen in years, he said. She has no case whatsoever. Everything you've done has been to protect your legal rights. I'll respond with a letter explaining that if she continues this harassment, we'll file a lawsuit against her personally for abuse of process, harassment, and defamation for the false police report. Caldwell sent his response, and I didn't hear anything more from Patricia's attorney. But the damage to Patricia's reputation was spreading. Word had gotten out in Pinewood Heights about her removal as president and the reasons behind it. Several residents reached out to me to apologize for her behavior. One of them was a woman named Susan, who lived 3 doors down from Patricia. She's been making everyone's life miserable for years, Susan told me over coffee. Constant complaints about minor rule violations, threatening people with fines, trying to control everything. Most of us have been too intimidated to push back. But now that the board finally stood up to her, people are coming forward with their own stories. Like what? I asked. She fined one family $1,500 because their Halloween decorations stayed up 2 days past November 1st, Susan said. She reported another neighbor to CPS claiming child neglect, completely fabricated, just because she didn't like that they parked their boat in their driveway. She's tried to ban certain colors of house paint, certain types of plants, even certain dog breeds. She's been abusing her power for years. This painted a picture of someone who was genuinely troubled, someone who needed control and lashed out when she didn't get it. I almost felt sorry for Patricia, but then I remembered all the stress and expense she'd caused me. In October, the situation took an unexpected turn. I was checking my mail when I saw Patricia walking her small white dog on the street near my property. She saw me and, to my surprise, walked over. "Mr. Vance, can we talk?" she asked. Her voice was different, lacking the sharp edge it usually had. "I suppose," I said cautiously. "I want to apologize," Patricia said, the words clearly difficult for her. "I handled this entire situation poorly. I should have asked your permission before building the shelter. I should have accepted the consequences with grace instead of lashing out. I've been in therapy and I'm starting to understand that I have control issues." I didn't know what to say. This was the last thing I'd expected. "I'm dropping the lawsuit," Patricia continued, "and I'm not going to bother you anymore. I just wanted you to know that I recognize I was wrong." "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "It took a lot of courage to come here." Patricia nodded, looking down at her dog. "The shelter has actually been wonderful for the community. We've helped a lot of people. I just wish I'd gone about it the right way from the start." She walked away, and I stood there processing what had just happened. It felt anticlimactic somehow, but also like a genuine resolution. The monthly lease payments continued arriving like clockwork. $2,000 every month, deposited automatically into my account. By the end of the year, I'd received $22,000 in total, accounting for the back rent and 10 months of regular payments. The warming shelter on my land was being used regularly now. The HOA had established a partnership with the county to provide emergency shelter during cold weather events, host community meetings, and serve as a distribution center for local food banks. I drove past it regularly and saw cars in the small parking area they'd established, saw families coming and going, saw real good being done. In December, Dorothy Sanders, the new HOA president, invited me to their annual holiday meeting. I almost declined, but curiosity got the better of me. The community center was decorated with lights and garland, and about 50 residents had turned out for the event. Dorothy welcomed me personally, and even gave a small speech thanking me for leasing the land for the warming shelter. "Xavier Vance has been a true friend to our community," she said, which felt generous considering how the whole thing had started. "The shelter on his land has served over 300 people this year during emergencies, hosted dozens of community events, and helped distribute food and supplies to families in need. While we didn't start this relationship on the right foot, I'm grateful we found a way to work together." People actually applauded. Patricia was there, sitting quietly in the back, and she gave me a small nod when our eyes met. She looked different somehow, less rigid, less angry. After the meeting, Marcus Chen pulled me aside. "I wanted you to know, the board has been discussing a proposal for when your lease comes up for renewal in 9 years, he said. "We'd like to eventually purchase that 8th acre from you outright, if you'd be willing to sell. We're talking about establishing a permanent community center there, maybe expanding the current structure." "That's a long way off," I said. "It is," Marcus agreed, "but we wanted you to know we value what you've allowed us to do with that land. You could have forced us to tear everything down, could have made our lives hell. Instead, you negotiated fairly and gave us a chance to do something good." I went home that night feeling genuinely good about the situation for the first time. What had started as a violation of my property rights had somehow evolved into something positive. I was being fairly compensated. The HOA was providing real value to the community, and even Patricia seemed to be getting help for her issues. January 2026 brought heavy snow again, though nothing like the previous year's blizzard. The warming shelter activated for a week when power outages hit the area. I drove over one evening out of curiosity and was surprised to see Patricia there, volunteering. She was helping serve hot soup to families, interacting with children, actually smiling. She saw me standing in the doorway and came over. "Would you like some soup?" she asked. "It's pretty good, actually." "Sure," I said. We sat together in an awkward silence for a moment before Patricia spoke. "I know my apology in October probably seemed insincere," she said. "But I really am sorry. I've been doing a lot of work in therapy, dealing with some childhood trauma, some control issues. I joined the HOA board because I wanted to make things better for my community, but somewhere along the way, I became exactly the kind of person I always hated, a petty tyrant. We all make mistakes," I said. "The important thing is learning from them." "I cost you a lot of time and money with all those false complaints," Patricia said. "If you'd like, I could pay you back for those expenses. The inspections, the legal fees." I considered it. Part of me wanted to accept, but I could see she was genuinely trying to change. "Keep your money," I said. "Spend it on therapy instead. But if you really want to make amends, volunteer here more. Use your organizational skills for actual good instead of harassing people." Patricia smiled slightly. "Deal." By spring, the warming shelter had become a fixture of the community. The HOA had added solar panels to reduce utility costs, planted a small garden around it that volunteers maintained, and painted a mural on one wall depicting the Colorado mountains. It looked intentional now, like it belonged there, rather than like something hastily constructed during an emergency. My monthly payments continued without issue. I'd started putting the money into a retirement account, and it was adding up nicely. $24,000 per year wasn't life-changing money, but it was substantial passive income for land I wasn't using anyway. In June, I received an unexpected call from the local news. A reporter named Jennifer Adams wanted to do a story about the warming shelter and the unusual circumstances that led to it. "It's a human interest piece," she explained, "about how conflict can sometimes lead to positive outcomes if people are willing to work together." I agreed to be interviewed, as did Dorothy Sanders and several other board members. Patricia declined, which I thought was wise. Her part in the story wasn't something to be proud of, even if she'd changed since then. The story aired in July and was surprisingly positive. It focused on the shelter's impact on the community, showed footage of families being helped during cold weather events, and interviewed residents who praised the facility. My interview was brief, just explaining how the lease arrangement had been worked out and emphasizing that property rights need to be respected even during emergencies. The story got picked up by a few regional outlets and even made it onto a national news website as a feel-good piece about community cooperation. I got a few calls from people in other states dealing with HOA disputes, looking for advice. I told them all the same thing: know your rights, document everything, and if possible, find a way to turn the situation into something positive for everyone. In August, my parents visited from Kansas City. They'd heard about the whole situation in bits and pieces through my phone calls, but seeing the shelter in person made it real for them. "So you're getting $2,000 a month from these people?" my dad asked, staring at the building. "Every month like clockwork," I confirmed. "And they're the ones who built it without asking," my mom said. "That's right," I said. My dad shook his head in amazement. "Son, you turned a nightmare into a gold mine. I'm impressed." We walked around the property, and I showed them the garden area the volunteers had planted, the solar panels, the parking area. The shelter was hosting a community meeting that evening, and people were starting to arrive. It's actually kind of nice, my mom said. I mean, once you get past how it got there, it's a good thing for the neighborhood. That evening, as my parents and I were having dinner at my house, Dorothy Sanders stopped by. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. "I just wanted to drop something off." She handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter from the HOA board and a check for $5,000. "What's this?" I asked. "The board voted to give you a bonus," Dorothy explained. "A thank you for being so reasonable about everything. We know we put you through a lot of stress, and we wanted to show our appreciation for how you've handled it." I was touched. "You didn't have to do this." "We wanted to," Dorothy said. "You've been a better neighbor to us than we were to you. This seemed like the right thing to do." After she left, my dad raised his glass. "To turning lemons into lemonade," he said. We clinked glasses, and I felt genuinely fortunate. What had started as one of the most frustrating experiences of my life had somehow worked out better than I could have imagined. In September, I attended the HOA's annual meeting out of curiosity. Elections were being held for board positions. Patricia had chosen not to run for re-election, and Dorothy Sanders was running for president officially. She won easily. After the meeting, I saw Patricia talking with some neighbors, laughing at something someone said. She looked relaxed and happy in a way I'd never seen before. When the crowd thinned, she came over to me. "I wanted you to know I'm selling my house," she said. "Moving to Fort Collins to be closer to my daughter and grandkids." "That sounds nice," I said. "It is," Patricia agreed. "And it'll be good to get a fresh start somewhere new. Somewhere I'm not known as the crazy HOA lady." She smiled self-deprecatingly. "For what it's worth, people here seem to have forgiven you," I said. "I've heard several residents say you've changed." "That's kind of them," Patricia said, "but I think some distance will be healthy. Besides, my daughter just had a baby, and I want to be the kind of grandmother who helps and supports, not the kind who criticizes and controls." We shook hands, and I wished her well. I genuinely meant it. People can change, and Patricia seemed to be genuinely working on herself. October marked the 2-year anniversary of the warming shelter being built on my land. The HOA organized a small celebration, inviting residents and community partners who had contributed to its success. There was food, music, and several speakers who shared stories about how the shelter had helped them. One woman talked about how she and her 3 children had stayed there during a power outage when her youngest was recovering from surgery and needed to stay warm. An elderly man described how the shelter had served as a meeting place for a support group that had been struggling to find an affordable location. A volunteer coordinator from the county talked about how the shelter had become a model for other communities trying to establish emergency response resources. I stood in the back, listening to these stories, and felt a strange sense of pride. Yes, the shelter had been built without my permission, and yes, I'd fought for fair compensation. But ultimately, this building on my land was making a real difference in people's lives. By the end of 2026, I'd received a total of $42,000 in lease payments, plus the $5,000 bonus. The property taxes on that 1/8 acre were paid by the HOA, and they'd maintained everything perfectly. My storage shed looked shabby by comparison. In January 2027, I got a call from Marcus Chen with an interesting proposal. "Xavier, the board has been discussing this for months, and we wanted to run it by you," he said. "We'd like to formally purchase the 1/8 acre where the shelter stands. We've had it appraised, and the fair market value is approximately $40,000. We'd like to offer you $60,000, plus forgiveness of the remaining lease term, plus a provision that you get free use of the facility for any personal events you might want to host for the rest of your life." I was surprised by the generosity of the offer. "That's very fair," I said. "Can I think about it?" "Of course," Marcus said. "Take your time." I spent a week considering the offer. On one hand, the monthly lease income was nice. $24,000 per year added up. Over the remaining 8 years of the lease, I'd receive nearly $200,000. On the other hand, $60,000 upfront, no longer having any connection to the HOA, and being able to completely close this chapter of my life had its appeal. I called Caldwell to get his opinion. "Financially, keeping the lease makes more sense long term," he said. "But there's value in simplicity. Take the money, invest it wisely, and move on with your life. Plus, things can change over 8 years. What if the HOA has financial trouble and stops paying? What if there's damage to your property and disputes over responsibility? Sometimes a clean break is worth something." That made sense. I called Marcus back and accepted the offer with one modification. I wanted $80,000. To my surprise, he agreed immediately. "The board authorized me to go up to 90 if necessary," Marcus admitted. 80 is more than fair. We closed the sale in March 2027. The legal process took a few weeks, involving surveys to formally establish the boundary of the sold parcel, title work, and various other paperwork. But eventually, I received a check for $80,000, and the 8th acre where the warming shelter stood was officially transferred to the Pinewood Heights HOA. At the closing, Dorothy Sanders presented me with a plaque that read, "In appreciation to Xavier Vance, whose property became the foundation for community compassion. Thank you for your patience, understanding, and partnership." "We're going to mount this at the shelter," Dorothy said. "So everyone knows the role you played in making this possible." I felt embarrassed but touched. "You didn't have to do that." "We wanted to," Dorothy said. "You could have made this impossible. Instead, you found a way to work with us. That's worth recognizing." As I drove home that afternoon, I reflected on the entire experience. From that angry morning in February 2025, when I discovered construction on my land, through all the conflict with Patricia, the harassment, the false complaints, the eventual resolution, and now the final sale. I'd been paid well over $120,000 in total when I added up all the lease payments and the final purchase price. Land I'd never planned to use had generated substantial income. More than that, though, the experience had taught me something about conflict resolution. My initial instinct had been to fight, to force the HOA to remove the shelter immediately, to make them pay for their violation of my rights. I'd been right to demand fair compensation, but I'd also been willing to find a solution that worked for everyone. That willingness to negotiate, to see the bigger picture beyond my own anger, had turned a nightmare situation into something genuinely positive. The warming shelter continues to serve the Pinewood Heights community today. It's activated during winter weather emergencies, hosts community meetings and events, and serves as a distribution center for various charitable programs. The plaque with my name hangs near the entrance, which still feels surreal sometimes when I drive past it. Patricia moved to Fort Collins as she'd planned. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she's doing well, heavily involved in her grandchildren's lives, and has remained in therapy. She volunteers at a women's shelter there, using her organizational skills to actually help people rather than controlling them. I'm glad she found a healthier path. The Pinewood Heights HOA, under Dorothy Sanders' leadership, has become much more reasonable and community-focused. They still enforce rules, because that's what HOAs do, but they do it with common sense and compassion rather than zealous rigidity. Several residents have told me it's a completely different organization than it was under Patricia's presidency. As for me, I invested most of the money from the sale in a diversified portfolio. Some of it I used to finish restoring my Ford Bronco, which had been sitting half completed in my garage. I took a nice vacation to Alaska, something I'd been putting off for years. And I paid off the remaining mortgage on my property, making me completely debt-free. I still own the remaining 4 7/8 acres, and I have no plans to sell. The land is mine, truly mine now, with no complications or disputes. I've thought about what to do with it eventually. Maybe I'll build a larger house, or maybe I'll keep it natural and wild. The point is, it's my choice. Sometimes on cold winter evenings, I drive past the warming shelter and see the lights on inside, see cars in the parking lot, see families being helped. I think about that morning in February 2025 when I stormed out of my house to confront Patricia and her construction crew. I think about how angry I was, how violated I felt, how certain I was that this was the worst thing that could have happened. Life has a funny way of working out. What felt like a disaster became an opportunity. What started as a violation of my rights became a source of significant income, and eventually, a source of community good that I helped make possible. The key was knowing when to fight, when to negotiate, and when to find common ground. The whole experience taught me that principles matter, but so does pragmatism. Standing up for your rights doesn't mean being inflexible. Sometimes the best outcome isn't about winning or losing, but about finding a solution that serves everyone's interests. The HOA got their community shelter. I got fair compensation and ultimately a good price for land I wasn't using. The community got a valuable resource. Even Patricia, in a roundabout way, got the push she needed to address her issues and become a better person. I'm not saying I'd want to go through it again. The stress, the harassment, the months of uncertainty were genuinely difficult. But looking back now, with perspective and distance, I can see how each challenge pushed things toward a better resolution. And I'm grateful for how it all turned out. These days, when people ask me about HOA horror stories, I tell them mine. But I also tell them it doesn't have to end badly. Sometimes conflict is just the starting point for something better. If you're willing to work through it with patience, clear boundaries, and a willingness to find common ground. The warming shelter stands on what used to be my land, serving the community, helping people in need, bringing neighbors together. Every time I see it, I'm reminded that even the most frustrating situations can transform into something meaningful if you handle them right. And that monthly income that started as compensation for a violation became the foundation for my financial security and the community's most valuable resource. That's the story of how the HOA built a warming shelter on my land during a storm, and how I made them pay lease fees every month until I finally sold them the land for a substantial profit. It wasn't the easiest journey, but it was definitely worth it.